As of 2023, people are paying a lot of attention to how Africa does business with Russia. This is because of important events happening in the world, like Russia invading Ukraine. Because of this big change in world affairs, people are talking about what might happen to Russia's relationships with African countries and the business they do there. To really understand this topic, it's important to look closely at how Africa and Russia do business together. We need to listen to what experts say and learn from many different trusted sources. However, before we begin our video, we would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and also press the bell icon. Let's get started. Complex geopolitical dynamics. Throughout history, Russia has had complex relationships with African countries. These relationships involve both politics and money. But now the situation is even more complicated because of Russia invading Ukraine. This has added another layer of difficulty to how Russia deals with Africa. The way African countries vote in the United Nations about this conflict shows that they have their own different reasons for supporting certain sides. Looking at these votes helps us understand how Africa is changing its connections with Russia during these uncertain times. Shifting public perceptions and narrative strategy. People in West Africa still really like Russia, but in other parts of Africa, the way they see Russia has been getting worse bit by bit. Russia has noticed this and is trying to do things to make people look at something else instead of its goals to get resources from Africa. These things Russia is doing are like stories that they tell. These stories are important because they affect how people think about what Russia is doing and what it wants in Africa. Historical factors and influence. Russia's involvement in Africa goes back a long time. With things like being there during colonial times and having power during the Soviet era, they also sell weapons and have connections with the military, like the Wagner Group helping out. All of this has made Russia really important in Africa. When they do exercises together with the military, it shows that Africa is doing things on its own in a changing world. Economic interests and engagement. Russia's economic interests in Africa have remained relatively modest when compared to other global players, such as China. Despite harboring aspirations to bolster economic ties, Russia's tangible economic impact on the continent has remained limited. The sectors where Russia has managed to make significant inroads include wheat, oil, and arms. These sectors constitute approximately 20% of Russia's overall exports to Africa. However, despite these efforts, Russia's economic influence on Africa remains substantially less pronounced than that of China, which has established itself as a major economic player on the continent. Geopolitical strategies and asymmetric methods. Russia has a unique way of changing how things work in Africa. They do things like selling weapons and sending private soldiers to help. This has helped Russia become more powerful in Africa. But sometimes, these actions have made life harder for the people in those countries and made it difficult for those places to grow in a good way. Russia is particularly interested in countries like Libya, Sudan, Mali, Guinea, and Angola. Even though this approach works sometimes, people are worried about what might happen to these African countries in the future because of it. Challenges and future prospects. After the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's reasons for getting involved in Africa have become stronger, even though they don't have a lot to offer economically. Africa is interested in growing its economy and doesn't want to criticize Russia too much. This makes Africa a good place for Russia to work with. But Russia has its own problems, like its economy getting smaller and not investing much in Africa or trading with it. Still, Russia really wants to be a big player on the world stage. They're using Africa's 54 votes at the United Nations to show that what they're doing is right and to get more power. The second Russia-Africa Summit. The second Russia-Africa Summit that took place in July 2023 is a really big deal. It could change the way Russia and African countries work together a lot. Even with all the problems caused by the pandemic and changes in world politics, African countries are brave for keeping good relationships with Russia. The first summit in 2019 started the process of making agreements, and the second summit is a chance to work together even more. They can talk about politics, money, and culture to make the relationship between Russia and Africa even better. UN General Assembly resolutions and Africa's stances. When African countries vote on decisions in the United Nations about Russia and Ukraine, it shows how different they all feel. The way they vote tells us that African countries have many different opinions about what Russia is doing and how it's affecting Ukraine's land. Some decisions get a lot of support, while others don't get as much. This shows that Africa's connection with Russia on the world stage is really complex and not all the same. Conclusion. Think of Africa's relationships with Russia like a beautiful pattern made from history, world politics, making money, and how people see things. Russia and African countries have a complicated mix of wanting power, needing money, and how the world is changing. Russia has to be careful as it works with African nations. It's tough to balance what Russia wants with what African countries want. In the next while, how Africa and Russia get along will depend on lots of things like money chances, politics, and what's happening in the world. That's it for today. We hope you found our video interesting. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and share it with others. Also, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new uploads. In the end, thanks for watching and see you next time.